This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Elliott Parker on the show. He is the CEO of High Alpha Innovation and the author of a new book coming out called The Illusion of Innovation. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. And, what are some of the struggles that us as tech leaders have when we're trying to become more efficient? And sometimes we're doing the opposite of that when it comes to innovation. Anyway, with all that being said, Elliott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Sure. Yeah, I run a company called High Alpha Innovation, which I spun out of a venture studio called High Alpha a few years ago. High Alpha Innovation, we build startups with corporations, universities, and entrepreneurs as a way to help corporations access innovation that would be hard to do internally, help founders create companies that are more likely to succeed and achieve big outcomes because of their affiliation with us and with the corporations we partner with. Before that, spent my career in corporate venture capital, corporate innovation, many years as an entrepreneur, and also spent 7 years working with a gentleman named Clayton Christensen at his consulting firm in Boston. Clay was the Harvard Business School professor who came up with the idea of disruptive innovation. Wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma almost 30 years ago now, that kind of created a whole new way of thinking about how to innovate inside of large organizations.
Awesome. So let me ask you a quick question when it comes to going down that path. And it sounds like you guys are doing kind of like an incubator for small businesses and kind of working through that. Do you deal with a lot of people that are like branching off an idea out of their current business, or is it more like people are straight out of college that are, entrepreneur mindset and going right for it?
More the former. Generally, we're working with, think of like Fortune 500 companies that have a really deep understanding of their markets and their customers, know what innovation needs to exist, but run into problems, challenges, making that innovation real inside the companies because of the innovator's dilemma. The organization's set up and optimized for predictable, efficient operation at scale, and sometimes doing new things requires making mistakes and being deliberately inefficient. We find that launching startups outside where that corporation can come in as an investor and maybe a customer, distribution partner for that startup, it creates an amazing way for these organizations to learn. We combine that understanding of markets, scale operations that the corporation has with the learning ability of startups. Startups are by nature, by design, very inefficient. They learn quickly. And so we can help those corporations access learning, build strategic options for the future through their investment in these companies. And everybody is better off. Corporations are accessing innovation. The founders, entrepreneurs we bring in and recruit to run these companies are more likely to achieve big outcomes than if they were doing this on their own. And hopefully we're solving big problems along the way that society needs us to solve.
Yeah, for sure. So you wrote a book, and is this your first book, or have you done this before? And what motivated you to get on this path?
First book, super fun experience. Highly recommend. I already got ideas about what other books I might write, but it's been a great experience. Yeah, the reason I decided to write the book, The Illusion of Innovation, is because of what I am seeing and what so many others are seeing in the world right now. And that is the sense that our large institutions, whether they're big companies, governments, schools, seem less capable of delivering breakthrough change than they once were. And we all kind of sense that that's true. You can find amazing examples of incredible change that came out of large corporations 50 years ago. It seems like it's harder to find those today. And when crises come, it seems like the corporations, government, schools just seem less capable than they used to be in the face of challenge or opportunity. And so I wanted to understand, well, why is that? What's going on? Is that true? It is true. Well, why? And if it is true, it's a problem. What can we do about it? And so that's why I wrote the book. Wanted to understand that problem a little bit more.
Yeah, it does seem like a lot of the big innovations that we've seen, especially in the tech side, over the last 10 or 15 years, have all been startups that came from nowhere and then, completely revamped, something that may have already existed but wasn't well executed and, reinvented it. And I think back to, 15 years ago, Cisco WebEx was the only way to do these calls like we're doing right now. And it never really picked up and never was innovative. It never was one of those things that somebody, started and said, hey, we're going to jump on a WebEx. I mean, they kind of did here and there, but it wasn't an innovative product. It was from this big company called Cisco, which everybody thinks that's where it would come from. And then Zoom came from nowhere and kind of took that, through a startup and became huge during COVID. And, now everybody has Zoom calls and Zoom meetings.
Yeah, remember, it wasn't that long ago. We were all spending like $40,000 outfitting conference rooms with Grab for us to do.
Yeah. And now we just do it on our laptop and it's fine.
Yeah.
Even better, actually.
So these startups are able to produce amazing innovation and change. And contrast that with the world like 70 years ago, where you had a Bell Labs operating, where you had some of the best physicists and scientists in the world collaborating together inside a large corporation and systematically producing innovations, inventions that created the modern electronics industry. I think we're unlikely to see anything like that maybe again, at least for quite some time. The reason is that communications have become a lot cheaper, easier. It's easier for anyone in the world to talk to anyone for free, essentially, and to share ideas. Computing power is prevalent and pretty close to free for just about anyone. So we've got access to building blocks. We've got the ability to share ideas. We've got the ability to think with help of computers. That becomes faster with AI. And then third, we've got access to cheaper power to do big things. Fourth, we've got amazing innovation has happened in the last few decades around funding of ideas and companies. And so all of that, what it nets out to is that we're living in a decentralized world where individuals and small teams are much more empowered to do big things than they were even just 20 years ago. You think about if you and I wanted to launch a startup 20 years ago, well, boy, we need a lot of money because we got to have servers on site. We need a big team of people. Now it's really inexpensive to start companies and to do really amazing things. We look at some pretty significant acquisitions, exits that have happened, companies of relatively small size. Remember when Instagram sold for over $1 billion, very small team. Everyone was shocked by that. Now we all realize that Facebook got a screaming good deal with that, and it's not unusual in the market. So small teams can do a lot more. What that means is larger companies, it's much harder to compete. And we see the effect of that. We see the lifespans of large companies shrinking. Much, much harder to compete in this new environment. And the thing is, most corporations haven't changed their approach. They're still acting and behaving as if it was the world of the 1950s, where you could win by centralizing resources and assets inside the corporation, managing those things internally to produce great outcomes. In a decentralized world, corporations win by coordinating external assets and resources rather than internalizing those things. Most corporations haven't yet adapted. So when it comes to innovation, we're still doing this centralized thing where we think a lot of innovation, business model innovation specifically, is going to come from our own internal teams. And the reality that's just not true anymore. And so corporations need to figure out how to engage with external startups and smaller teams and individuals to do big things.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you 100%. And, I can think back probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was this trend, and I probably had 7 or 8 people on the podcast talking about it, about digital transformation. That was kind of like the buzzword for corporations. Yeah. We're all going to go through a digital transformation, and we're going to optimize everything, and we're going to make everything more efficient, and we're going to, save money and create higher innovations. And it sort of like went in that direction a little bit, but again, we kind of fell back on ourselves and centralized and grew bigger and got slower. It's like you think about that big ship. It's hard to turn a big ship, and I feel like that's kind of where we're at. And I think you're talking about doing something completely different than that.
Yeah. I mean, systems produce the output they're designed to produce, right? When we look at big companies and it feels like we can't get anything done, it takes committees to make decisions. We move really slowly. Those are features of the system, not bugs, because these large corporations are designed to be safe. They're optimized to make things predictable, to not do anything rash, to not do anything that's capital inefficient. They're optimized for that safety, capital efficiency. And so as a result, we make decisions by committees because the goal is to be safe. The problem is that innovating is capital inefficient. It requires making mistakes. It requires being unsafe to a degree. It requires putting the system under stress. And those things are fundamentally in tension and conflict. That's the heart of the innovator's dilemma that Clayton Christensen described. Executives, corporations can do everything right to run their business, everything they're taught to do in business school. Ultimately, their company will still fail because they seek more and more capital efficiency. They're trying to increase profits by serving their best customers. Over time, and as they move up market, they leave themselves exposed at the low end to new startups that can come in with disruptive innovation, grab a foothold, move up market themselves, and ultimately displace the incumbents. So really, this is probably the hardest problem in business to solve.
Yeah, it's a lot like, I think back to early Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was known for saying, move fast and break stuff.
Yeah.
But then, shareholders got involved and things slowed down. And, it took an acquisition of, Instagram to really start that innovation again. They found we're getting our lunch taken by this startup. We've got to go and buy them essentially.
Yeah. Isn't that right? It's so true that it requires deliberate inefficiency. And boy, Mark Zuckerberg, founders can do that to a degree, right? Even in Facebook, you've got a founder who had control of the company, still ultimately is responsible to investors, right or wrong, who are advocating for short-term capital efficiency. You say, no, I want to invest in these long-term things. Sometimes he has to break things through acquisition. And that's the challenge. I think that as these organizations scale, they create systems of governance, incentives, talent, processes that are designed to run these amazing scaled organizations. And they are amazing. They're incredible what scaled corporations can do. The problem is that when you're trying to do something fundamentally different, transformational business model innovation, that same system that you design for scaled execution of a company is not designed to go learn. Big companies are really bad at learning. Startups, on the other hand, are learning machines, super inefficient, making mistakes all over the place. And as a result, they're able to learn. It's a structural challenge inside of companies, this type of innovation. And my view is it requires a structural solution. It requires far more experimentation outside the walls of the corporation.
So how do you do that? If you are a corporation, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting analogies. If you don't mind a diversion for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Look at how innovation happens in natural ecosystems like the Amazon jungle. A few years ago, I had the amazing experience of going to the Amazon with my son, who's in grad school right now to become an entomologist studying insects. We went down the Amazon jungle to look for bugs, which is crazy.
I'm sure they're everywhere. I'm sure you found some.
Oh boy, did we find bugs? Yeah. And what's amazing in the Amazon is the diversity. The variation that you find in the ecosystem is incredible. And you might think about that variation is actually a form of innovation. And as a result, the Amazon jungle is incredibly resilient. No matter what people do, the Amazon jungle is going to be around for a long, long time to come because it's so resilient. And you think about how the Amazon innovates. In every way, it's the opposite of what we do inside of companies. The Amazon, there is no top-down hierarchical approach to innovation. It's kind of a random walk. There are no objectives. There's nobody saying a goal saying we need, 1 billion new life forms in the next 2 years, whatever. There's no objective. There are constraints. Innovation, evolution's constrained by how much sunlight and food there is and air. There's no communication about the innovation that's happening. There's no centralized committee where these things get funneled through and communicated out. And the innovation happens at the level of individual organisms and cells in the Amazon. It's not centralized. Now think about it inside of our companies, what we do. We centralize it. We communicate the heck out of it. We set objectives around that innovation, and it's hierarchical top down. Now, that doesn't produce resilience. That system is designed to do things really efficiently. And that's how you run a big company. That system is not designed to uncover anomalies, to trip into those mistakes that create learning in the way that the Amazon jungle does. The Amazon jungle, if there's a mutation at the level of a cell organism and it fails, the ecosystem's fine. But if that mutation succeeds, the ecosystem is poised to grab it and propagate it. We do the exact opposite inside our companies. And when you spot it, when you notice it, you realize it, the way that we innovate, try to change, the way we try to execute digital transformation, even inside of big companies, looks crazy. It looks crazy. It doesn't work. And yet we're all doing it over and over again. If we're going to solve this issue, we've got to try new things.
So what are some of those new things that we could do? Maybe if we are, head of the, IT department or software development manager, what could I do within my team inside the company to kind of spur that innovation and, break the mold of the pattern that we've been doing?
Yeah, the short answer is more experiments, fast, cheap, and weird. And I think if you look at the organizations, we've done some interesting study and research here into companies that have endured over 1,000 years. The oldest company in the world was launched 100 years after the fall of the Roman Empire. Wow. Just in the last 20, 25 years, was acquired and was no longer an independently operating company. So looking at these businesses, it's really fascinating to see what they do well to endure so long. And I think endurance is a good measure of how successful a company is. Companies that endure are amazing. They're exceptional at experimentation, at doing it systematically, inexpensively, in ways that are designed to uncover those surprises, anomalies that challenge the assumptions and beliefs that the organization has. So if I were an IT leader inside my company, what I would be looking for is systematic ways to run more experiments. What's an experiment in business? An experiment is anything the organization does where the outcome is not known beforehand. Now, you may find a lot of that's already happening in the organization. That's great. What I'd argue then is that what you need to do is make that a little bit more systematic and structured. So when you're running those experiments, what are the hypotheses? What are you trying to learn or to disprove? And let's put some structure and rigor around this so that we're making sure the lessons we learned are propagated. The lessons we learn are propagated in the company. So more experimentation. There are lots of structural ways to do that. It might be as simple as giving people a team, maybe you've got some more junior creative employees who have big ideas about what they could do and how this company could be better. Great. It may sound capital inefficient for them to go pursue those things and try it. Give them some room to do it. That's the basic. At the other extreme, the other end of the spectrum, we advocate for a lot of it, the organizations we work with, is the launch of external startups to go solve issues. We worked with IT leaders, for example, where I remember one big corporation, they had a challenge inside their business. They thought it was going to require a $20 million build to build internal software to solve the issue. We saw the problem and thought, if that's a $20 million problem for you, surely other people have the same issue. Why don't we go build an external startup? Because I think we could build a startup for like $1 million, get that going, provide a solution to your business. You can be an equity owner in the company, essentially get the solution for free, and then we'll go sell it to other customers and see how fast we can learn from them and make this thing even better and thereby improve your business. And it worked. It worked. So there are lots of structural ways to make sure you can invite in more experimentation. But the short answer is more experiments, fast, cheap, and weird.
So whenever you pitch an idea like that, like instead of spending $20 million to build this internal software, let's spin up a startup that you guys have equity in and we build this up. What kind of pushback do you get? Like, what is the reasons why they don't want to do that?
Yeah, primary objection is, well, we want to control it. We want to own it. And that is the organization saying we want to do things that reinforce what we already know, that preserve what exists. We tell organizations, we tell corporate leaders, look, you can be rich or you can be king. It's rare that you can be both. most of the time, sometimes there are occasions where you want to be king. You may not want to be rich. You do want to control the thing. If it's a new idea. But in most cases, if we're talking about transformational business model innovation, where you're thinking about entirely new ways of doing things, serving new customers, new products, those are things that need to be done outside the corporation, where you want to be surprised by what you learn. That's how you uncover new ways to grow the organization exponentially. If you're doing experiments that reinforce what you already know, that's not going to help the organization grow in the way you want to. So our view is that put it out there, don't control it strategically or financially. The benefit of that is you can sometimes invite in other investors and their money to help fund your innovation. And that innovation is going to produce more surprises. Those entrepreneurs are going to be incentivized in those little companies to go figure things out in amazing ways. And they will inevitably produce surprises that help the core organization, that large company, operate in new and better ways.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I know I was part of a company who did something very similar to what you were talking about, where it was a telco company many years ago, and they had, custom software that they used to develop their service order management, their sales systems, and their customer service that also integrated with their telco switches to turn on and on things, provision telephone numbers, connect cable modems, provision, all that stuff in the back end. And what they decided to do is to create another company that they own, fully, to develop that software and then sell it to competitors. And the problem that they ran into later on is they did this for maybe 10 years or so, and then dissolved that company, purchased it back, because they were concerned that the software was creating a competitive advantage that their competitors could also use. So they pulled it back out, and they ended up backing away from it. Have you seen that happen during any of your startup work?
Well, I've seen the impulse behind that all over the place, right? Yeah. The intent. The intent behind that is to be safe and to preserve, oh man, we're going to disrupt our own business. Well, the reality is, I would bet in that instance, even though they pulled it back, others came along with similar solutions that were equally disruptive, right?
Yeah. And what's so hilarious is they pulled it back and ended up, maybe 5 or 10 years later, purchasing software that one of their competitors and ended up developing in-house. So it's just like, what were you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's concerned that you're going to disrupt the industry, that you stop doing it and then purchase something that someone else was doing to disrupt the industry.
Yeah. Disruption's coming one way or another. You might as well be the one doing it.
Yeah. And that's the whole,
if you're not going to do it, somebody else is going to do it.
Yeah. That was the whole Kodak thing, right? They created the digital camera first, but they didn't want to, kill themselves with the purchase of film. So they didn't promote their digital camera. And then Canon came and made their launch.
They had a pretty good profit machine at the time. It's hard to give up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm guessing that when you have those profits, it's really hard to innovate.
It's exactly right. And that's why it really is a structural problem. What we find so often in large companies is large organizations know what they wish existed. They know what customers need. They know how the industry can be improved. And boy, it's easy to look at those things, even if those opportunities challenge our core model in some way or are different. Boy, we're all smart. We want to do this. We've got the intent. We've got the will. We've got the capital. Let's put a team together and go execute on this. The reality is, it's not a matter of intelligence or will. It is a structural problem. The organization will not allow those things to exist for all the reasons we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to approach these things with an alternate structure, a structure of governance, incentives, talent, processes that are designed to go learn, to do a fundamentally different activity. Our message to corporate leaders is that there's already a model for this, and it's called venture capital and venture-backed startups. Silicon Valley has developed and optimized and perfected a model of funding people with ideas and empowering them, incentivizing them to go do amazing things in very short amount of time. You don't have to reinvent this. You just have to get as close to that approach, that model, as you can as a corporation. That requires often launching things, funding experiments, partnering with startups outside the corporation rather than trying to do it internally. I don't care how smart your team is or how willing execs and people are to do it. it most of the time is going to lead to disappointment if those ideas you're pursuing are too different from what you already do.
Mm. So how would, a company find that those external, people to partner with to develop, they have a need, they see this issue, they see this problem. We can go back to the telco example. They needed a new service order management system that integrated with all their systems, that automated things, that allowed customers to order online, all these things. How would you go and find the partners that you're talking about?
Yeah, so this can be done a lot of different ways. If you recognize the truth that small teams and individuals are more empowered than ever to do amazing things and innovate, well, there are a lot of them out there in the form of small startups that if you're a corporation, you ought to be partnering with, investing in, acquiring in some cases, or in many cases, launching from scratch because the idea doesn't quite exist out there. Corporations know what they need. They have a deeper understanding of markets and customers than anybody else, certainly than the startups do that are entering their space. And so if I'm a technical leader inside a company, I want to make sure that we are putting in place really robust ways to engage outside startups. That includes finding ways to partner. That includes really nuts and bolts things like what type of insurance requirements do we have in place for the startups that we want to engage with? We've had many startups go try and sell to corporations where the insurance limits are more than that little startup could actually get a policy for. It's just not realistic. And as a result, a corporation can't actually engage in a meaningful way with startups. So partnership, investment, building, acquiring, corporations need to be very good at it. I would argue that for most corporations, their success over the next decade is going to be determined in large part by the quality of their engagement with outside startups.
Now, when it comes to that investment, you mentioned, even acquiring them and potentially acquisitions. Is it, a cautionary thing that the startups or the corporations need to kind of give the startups more autonomy and instead of trying to purchase and control them, but to really should just back off and use the product?
It totally depends. Here's a framework for thinking about it. Here's how we think about it. Scaled corporations are fantastic at execution. So if you're trying to solve an execution problem, the corporation's really well positioned to do that. What I mean by that is you know what the problem is, you know what the solution is, you just need to go do it. If you can predict with a strong degree of confidence how this thing's going to play out over the next 12 months, you've probably got an execution problem. The corporation is designed to do that. On the other hand, if you're looking at a problem where it's hard to predict how things are going to play out in the next 12 months, there's a high degree of ambiguity. You don't have an execution problem. You have a learning problem. Startups are optimized for learning problems. And so when you think about acquisition, what you need to understand at the base is, are we dealing still with a learning problem or an execution problem? If it's a learning problem, that thing needs to be distanced from the core business. On the other hand, if it's now an execution problem, we can fold that thing in. The corporation can go execute the heck out of it in a way the startup can't. So that's you first need to understand the nature of the problem you're dealing with and trying to solve.
So basically, you first have to figure out, is it a learning problem or an execution problem?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that helps inform the answer, by the way, to should this be done internally, externally. If you're looking at something where there is no existing solution, in some cases, the answer is we'll build the thing internally. The answer is build the thing internally when, again, it's an execution problem. We know what we need to do. We just need to go do it, and we can predict how it's going to play out. On the other hand, if you're dealing with a new problem and you're not really quite sure what the solution needs to look like or how to go about doing it, you can put an internal team on it. There's a good chance they're going to fail. The organization is not designed to allow that. An outside startup's going to be much better positioned to go execute on that learning problem and to come up with really creative solutions because of the incentives and the talent, process, and governance involved. They're going to figure things out and surprise you, ways the organization, the core company would never have seen.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. So going back to your book and, and you said you're already come up with ideas for your next one. I want to talk a little bit about the process behind, writing a book, because I've written some and it's always been so painful for me. Do you find yourself like it's something that you would schedule it and just set up a time, like I'm going to write between these hours, or is it just like, oh, I got to go write this down? You got excited and went and did it.
It's a mix of both, but in the end, I did have to go out and schedule the time, and there were a few instances where I I rented an Airbnb in the woods.
Yeah.
with a big bag of books, shut off my phone, told people I was gone, and spent 3 days just heads down, diving deep into it. And that was so much fun, by the way.
Yeah.
So it's I enjoyed that part of it, because for me, it's in that process, you're learning, you're figuring out, what do I really think? What do I really believe? Writing it down and putting it out in the world forces you to do that. And I like that experience.
Yeah. It's very introspective for sure.
Yeah.
So when does this book come out? When is it available? And how can people pick up a copy?
It's out April 16th. Yeah, it's April 16th, 2024. The book comes out, The Illusion of Innovation. It is available for pre-order anywhere books are sold. And it's getting good responses from people. I got a text earlier this week from an entrepreneur who had sent it to an executive at a big insurance company, saying, you need this book for all of the executives on your team, which I appreciated.
Awesome. I'll link that up in the show notes too at geekleader.com, so people can click through and connect with you, and as well as pick up a copy of the book. And Elliott, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. Yeah, folks can find me. Look for the book online. You can find me on Twitter at @ERParker.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.